My name is Claire Sullivan, and I'm 29 years old. I've been an FBI agent for almost 5 years. After graduating from the University of Virginia with degrees in criminology and law, I never imagined my legal training would be necessary to defend myself against my own family. But life has a strange way of surprising us. I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, the daughter of Robert and Margaret Sullivan. My younger brother, Kevin, was always their favorite. This isn't resentment, it's a fact that even my aunts and uncles openly acknowledge. Kevin is 27 years old and, unlike me, has never shown much ambition or responsibility. While I studied hard, maintained excellent grades, and worked part-time to pay part of my tuition, Kevin dropped out of college in his sophomore year and has been bouncing from job to job ever since. My entry into the FBI was the result of years of hard work and sacrifice. The selection process is extremely rigorous. Only about 3% of applicants are accepted. I underwent intensive training at Quantico, where I experienced the most challenging months of my life, both physically and mentally. But I made it, and when I received my badge for the first time, I felt a sense of pride I had never felt before. With my first steady salary as agent, I started saving to buy a house. I lived in a small apartment for 3 years, saving every penny I could. I skipped vacations, rarely went out to dinner, and avoided impulse. Finally, 2 years ago, I was able to put a down payment on a modest but comfortable home on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., where the FBI office where I work is located. It's not a mansion, but it has 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, and most importantly, it's mine. I paid for it with my sweat, my sacrifice, my determination. During this time, Kevin continued to live with my parent, contributing minimally to household expenses, even when he found temporary work. My parents never demanded much of him, always justifying it by saying he's still finding his way, or, not everyone has the same determination as you, Claire. Things started to change about 6 months ago when Kevin met Melissa. They started dating, and surprisingly, the relationship seemed serious. Melissa is a lovely woman, works as a nurse, and has a 4-year-old daughter from a previous relationship. I could tell she was having a positive influence on Kevin. He got a job at an electronics store and was talking about going back to school. During a family lunch 3 months ago, Kevin announced that he and Melissa were engaged. I was genuinely happy for him. Maybe this was exactly what my brother needed to finally grow up. My parents were ecstatic, finally. Their favorite son was settling down. The conversation quickly evolved to wedding plans, and then to where the couple would live. They can stay here for a while, my mother said, but this house is already cramped, and with little Sophie, they'll need more space. My dad nodded, then looked at me. Claire, you have that big house all to yourself. Wouldn't it make sense for Kevin, Melissa, and Sophie to move in there? You could move back to your old room here, or rent an apartment. I thought it was a joke. I laughed nervously and waited for someone to tell me it was a joke, but no one laughed. My parents looked at me with serious expressions, and Kevin looked embarrassed, but he didn't disagree. You can't be serious, I replied. I worked for years to buy that house. It's mine. Why doesn't Kevin save up and buy his own house like I did? Because he's starting a family, my mother replied as if it were obvious. They need a place now, not after years of saving. You're single. You don't need that much space, and you have a good, stable job, my father added. You can easily rent another place or buy another house in the future. She was too shocked to respond properly. I mumbled something about having to go back to work and hurried out. For the next few weeks, I received daily calls and texts from my parents insisting on donating my house. I tried to explain the absurdity of the situation, but they wouldn't listen. It's your duty as a sister, my mother insisted. Family should help family. Kevin is finally on the right path, my father argued. We can't let this opportunity slip away. Sophie needs stability. I tried to be reasonable. I suggested helping Kevin with renting an apartment until he could save for his own home. I offered to help him find assistance programs for first-time buyers. None of that was enough. My parents were fixated on the idea that I should simply hand over my house. Things got worse one Sunday when they showed up at my house with Kevin, Melissa, and Sophie. They brought some sandwiches and salads as if it were just a casual visit. But right after lunch, my mom started walking around the house, pointing at rooms and saying things like, "Sophie could have this room, isn't it? Perfect for a little princess." Or Kevin, you could turn this space into a study. Melissa looked mortified. She pulled me aside and whispered, Claire, I didn't know your parents had this idea. Kevin told me you were just discussing possibilities. I'm incredibly embarrassed. I was relieved that at least Melissa had common sense. Kevin, on the other hand, vacillated between looking embarrassed and excited about my parents' plan. At one point, he even started measuring the living room walls, mentioning where he would put his television. Stop, I finally said, after my mother began arguing about which of my things I should take and which I could generously leave for them. This is my house. I'm not giving it to Kevin. This is absurd. Don't be selfish, Claire, my father snapped. Kevin is starting a family. Do you think your work is more important than that? It's not about that, I replied. It's about the fact that I worked hard for this house. Kevin can work hard for his. You are always so materialistic, my mother sighed dramatically. I thought we raised you better than that. The situation escalated into a heated argument, with my parents accusing me of being selfish and insensitive. Melissa tried to intervene, saying they would be fine in an apartment, but was quickly silenced by my father. This is non-negotiable, my father finally declared, as if he had the authority to decide my property. We expect you to start looking for a new place within a month. Kevin and Melissa will need to move before the wedding. I was speechless. The audacity, the presumption, the complete disregard for my rights and my hard work left me stunned. After they left, I sat on the couch and cried in frustration. How could my own family treat me this way? The next day, I received an email from my father with links to apartments for rent near the FBI office. The subject line read, "Options for you to consider." That was the final straw. As an FBI agent, I deal with difficult situations every day. I've learned to remain calm under pressure, analyze problems objectively, and find effective solutions. I decided to apply these skills to my personal situation. First, I needed to set clear boundaries. I emailed my parents, stating unequivocally that I would not give Kevin my house and that I no longer wanted to discuss the matter. To my surprise, I received an indignant response from my father, claiming I was abandoning my family and that they were deeply disappointed in my lack of compassion. 2 days later, I returned home after a long day of work to find my parents and Kevin at my door. Kevin had a spare key. I'd given it to him for emergencies when I traveled for work. They had gone inside and were with a real estate agent who looked uncomfortable upon seeing me arrive. "What's going on here?" I asked, trying to maintain my composure. "We're just showing the house for an appraisal," my dad replied casually. "We need to know what a fair price would be for you if you decided to sell to Kevin." "I'm not selling the house," I replied, feeling my anger rise. "And you're not allowed to bring strangers into my house without my consent." The real estate agent quickly apologized and left, saying he wasn't aware of the situation. After he left, I confronted my family. "This is trespassing. You can't just come into my house and act like it's yours." "Don't be dramatic, Claire," my mother replied. "We're your family, not invaders. And this will be Kevin's house soon," my father added, as if it were a settled fact. "We're just speeding up the process." It was at that moment that I realized I couldn't handle this alone. My parents were irrational, and Kevin was allowing them to act on his behalf. After asking them to leave, which they reluctantly did, but not before my father left some documents on the table that appeared to be some kind of transfer of ownership agreement, I decided I needed legal help. The next morning, I changed all the locks in my house and contacted Michael Ross, a lawyer I knew through my work at the FBI. He had helped us on a few cases, and I respected him as a professional. I explained my situation over lunch, feeling a little foolish for needing legal advice to deal with my own family. Michael listened intently, without interruption. When I finished, I expected to see pity or perhaps embarrassment on his face. Instead, he laughed. It wasn't a mocking laugh, but a laugh of disbelief. "Sorry, Claire. I'm not laughing at you," he said quickly, noticing my confused expression. "I'm laughing at your parents' audacity. In 15 years of practicing law, I've never heard anything like it." He grabbed a napkin and began taking notes. "Let me clarify a few things. The house is registered in your name only, correct?" "Yes, just in my name. And there is no written agreement, even informal, promising the house to your brother." "Of course. Did your parents contribute financially to the purchase of the house?" "No, I saved every penny myself. Michael nodded, still writing. So legally, this is very simple. Your parents have absolutely no right to demand that you give your house to your brother. No court in the country would uphold such a demand. In fact, what they're doing, entering your home without permission, trying to appraise it without your consent, leaving transfer documents, could potentially be considered harassment. I felt immediate relief. Of course, I knew the house was legally mine, but hearing a professional confirm it so emphatically gave me the confidence I needed. What should I do now? I asked. First, he replied, you've already done well to change the locks. Second, I will draft a formal letter to your parents explaining the legal situation and demanding that they cease these attempts to take your property. This isn't something I would normally recommend for family dispute, but in this case, it seems necessary to establish clear and formal boundaries. I don't want to sue them, I clarified. I just want them to stop and understand that they're being irrational. I understand, Michael nodded. The letter won't be a threat of a lawsuit, but a firm clarification of the legal facts. Sometimes seeing something written on law firm letterhead makes people realize the seriousness of the situation. I agreed to the plan. While Michael was working on the letter, I got a call from my mother, wanting to know why I had changed the locks. Because you entered my house without permission, I replied calmly. Don't be ridiculous, Claire. We're your parents. We don't need permission. Actually, they do. It's my home, for now, she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Your father is talking to our lawyer. You can't just ignore your family's needs. That caught me off guard. Have you hired a lawyer? Yes. And he told us we have a strong case based on family obligation law. I almost laughed. Working for the FBI and having studied law, I knew there was no such thing as family obligation law that could force someone to give their property to a relative. My parents were bluffing, or worse, some unscrupulous lawyer was deceiving them. Mom, I suggest you do more research before spending money on this. There is no such law. We'll see, she replied before hanging up. 2 days later, Michael sent me the approval letter. It was direct, professional, and unequivocal about my legal rights. It also included an educational section on what constitutes trespassing and harassment, along with the potential legal consequences. I approved the document, and he sent it by certified mail to my parents. For the next week, I heard nothing from them. The silence was both a relief and a concern. Part of me feared they were planning some kind of legal action, however unfounded. Another part hoped the letter had finally made them realize the absurdity of the situation. The following Saturday, Melissa called me. She was clearly distressed. Claire, I'm so sorry about all of this, she said. I want you to know that I never supported this crazy idea of taking your house. Kevin and I had a long talk last night, and he finally agreed that your parents are being unreasonable. I felt a knot in my stomach loosen. I'm relieved to hear that, Melissa. How is Kevin? He's embarrassed, she admitted. Deep down, he always knew this was wrong, but, well, you know your parents. They can be very persuasive, especially with Kevin. What about the lawyer my parents hired? I asked. Melissa laughed humorlessly. There's no lawyer. It was just a friend of your father's who's a notary public. He told them they had no case, but your father refused to listen. After hanging up, I reflected on the conversation. I was happy that Kevin had finally seen reason, but I was still hurt by the whole situation. My own parents had tried to coerce me into giving up my home, something I had earned through my own efforts. The fact that they valued my work and independence so little saddened me deeply. The next day, I received a text message from my dad asking to meet for breakfast. I suggested a casual coffee as I didn't feel comfortable having them over, nor did I want to go to theirs. He agreed, though his response was curt and cold. When I arrived at the cafe, I found not only my parents, but also Kevin and Melissa. Kevin seemed nervous, constantly fidgeting with. My parents looked tense, and only Melissa offered a genuine smile when she saw me. After we asked, my father cleared his throat. We received your lawyer's letter, he began, his tone revealing his disapproval. Was it really necessary to take things this far, Claire? Before I could respond, Kevin intervened. No, Dad, Claire was right. We were wrong. We can't just demand that she give her house to me. My parents seemed surprised by Kevin's intervention. My mother started to say something, but Melissa gently placed her hand over hers. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, Melissa said firmly, Kevin and I are very grateful for your support, but we can't start our marriage by taking something that doesn't belong to us. Claire worked hard for that house. We will work hard for ours. My father looked ready to argue, but something in Melissa's determined gaze stopped him. He sighed deeply. "It seems you've all turned against us," he said, always playing it cool. "We were just trying to help the family." "Dad," I replied as calmly as possible, "you can help in many ways, but trying to force me to give up my home isn't one of them." It was disrespectful and unfair. My mother looked close to tears, but not from regret. It was more the kind of manipulative crying I knew well from childhood. "I never thought my own daughter would hire a lawyer against us." "I didn't hire a lawyer against you," I clarified. "I hired a lawyer to protect my rights after you entered my home without permission and began planning your move without my consent." Breakfast remained tense, but at least the housing issues seemed resolved. Kevin and Melissa announced they had found an apartment to rent near the hospital where she worked, and that they planned to save up to eventually buy their own place. My parents finally seemed to have accepted reality, though they still didn't apologize for the whole situation. As we were leaving, Kevin pulled me aside. "Claire, I'm sorry. I should have stopped this from the start." "It's okay, Kevin," I replied, even though I wasn't really okay. I was still hurt, but I didn't want to prolong the conflict. "No, it's not," he insisted. "I knew it was wrong, but you know how they are. I've always been the favorite, and that's made me complacent, I guess. I've let them think and decide for me for too long." For the first time, I saw my brother truly taking responsibility for his action. "Melissa seems to be having a good influence on you," I commented with a small smile. "She's amazing," he agreed. "When I showed her the letter from your lawyer, she was horrified. It made me see how wrong this all was. She said she wouldn't marry me if I continued to let our parents manipulate me like this." "She seems like just what you need," I replied honestly. We hugged, and I felt that maybe, just maybe, our relationship could improve from that moment on. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to return to normal. My parents were still a bit distant, but at least they'd stopped making unreasonable demands. Kevin and Melissa moved into their new apartment, and I was invited to a housewarming dinner. The place was small but cozy, and they seemed genuinely happy. Over dinner, Kevin mentioned that he had enrolled in night classes to finish his business degree. Melissa talked about her plans to specialize in pediatric nursing. For the first time, I saw my brother truly excited about his future, making concrete plans instead of just living day to day. As I was leaving, Kevin handed me an envelope. "It's your key," he said, "and a letter. You don't need to read it now." At home, I opened the letter. It was a sincere apology, not just for the incident at home, but for years of dysfunctional family dynamics. Kevin admitted to having taken advantage of our parents' favoritism and acknowledged how difficult it must have been for me to always grow up in his shadow, despite all my achievements. "I've always secretly envied you," he wrote. "Your determination, your clarity of purpose, your ability to follow your own path regardless of our parents' approval. I think they tried to compensate with me for what they saw as your rebellion, but really it was just your independence. I want you to know that I'm working to be a little more like you." Tears streamed down my face as I read. Years of hurt wouldn't be erased by a letter, but it was a start, an acknowledgement, finally, that I wasn't wrong for wanting to live my life on my own terms. As for my parents, our relationship remained complicated. They eventually stopped treating me coldly, but they never explicitly apologized. During a Sunday lunch a few weeks later, my father casually mentioned, "That lawyer of yours, is he any good? We're thinking about updating our will." Coming from my father, this was practically an admission that I was right. "Yes, he's very good," I replied. "I can give you his contact information." A few days later, I got a call from Michael. "Your parents came to my office today," he said, sounding slightly. "I hope they didn't cause any trouble," I replied. "No, nothing like that. They came to update their will, as they mentioned, but they also wanted to discuss, well, the previous situation. Your father asked if there really wasn't a law requiring children to deed property to needy siblings." I rolled my eyes, even though Michael couldn't see me through the phone. "And what did you say?" I explained the basics. Of property law, of course, but the most interesting part was when your mother asked if you had any grounds to sue them for the incident. This caught me off guard. "Are they worried I'll sue them?" Apparently. I explained that you never expressed such intent, but that technically, trespassing could be considered. They seemed genuinely alarmed. I think they finally realized the seriousness of what they did. After that conversation, I noticed a subtle change in my parents' behavior. They began to show a new respect for my boundary. It wasn't perfect. Years of family dynamics don't change overnight, but it was progress. Kevin and Melissa were married in a simple ceremony 6 months later. During the reception, my mother sat next to me as we watched Kevin dance with his new wife. "He looks happy, doesn't he?" she commented. "Yes, it does," I agreed. "Melissa is great for him." There was a moment of silence. Then my mother said something I never expected to hear. "You seem happy too, Claire, with your job, your home, your life." I don't think we've ever really acknowledged that before. It wasn't exactly an apology, but coming from my mother, it was meaningful. "Thank you, Mom. I'm glad. Your father and I, we don't always understand your choices, but we're proud of you. We should have told you that more often." I swallowed the lump in my throat. This means a lot to me. The week after the wedding, I received a surprise visit from Kevin and Melissa. They brought pizza and beer, and we spent the night talking and laughing like never before. As they were leaving, Kevin mentioned that they were thinking of buying a house in a year or two after he finished his studies, and they had saved enough for a down payment. "If you need help looking, I'm here to help," I offered. I learned a lot in the process of buying mine. "Actually," Melissa said, "we wanted to ask for some different advice. We're thinking about having another child, and we want to be financially prepared. You've always been so disciplined with money, ... "Sure," I replied, feeling a surge of pride that they'd come to me for advice. "I can help you put together a savings plan." As the months passed, my relationship with Kevin continued to improve. He finished his studies and landed a job at a tech company where he quickly began to excel. Melissa was promoted at the hospital, and little Sophie, now almost 6, was thriving at school. As for my parents, our relationship never returned to the way it was before the incident, but maybe that wasn't so bad. The old pattern was based on unequal expectations and blatant favorites. Our new dynamic, while sometimes uncomfortable, was more honest. They began to treat me like an adult with a right to her own life, not just a daughter who had to bow to family demand. A year after the incident, my parents invited me to dinner at their house. When I arrived, I was surprised to see it was just the 3 of us 7 and his family weren't there. Dinner started off a bit tense, with superficial conversations about the weather and my work, at least what I could share. After dessert, my father cleared his throat nervously. "Claire, your mother and I have something to tell you." I felt a knot in my stomach, fearing some kind of bad medical news or other family drama. "We want to apologize," he continued, looking extremely uncomfortable with the words, "for the incident at the house. We were wrong." I was momentarily speechless. My father had literally never admitted he was wrong about anything in my entire life. "We treated you unfairly," my mother added, "not just on that occasion, but on many occasions over the years." The lawyer, Michael, my father continued, "he made us see some things, not just about the law, but about how we treat our children differently. He asked us if we would have made the same demands of Kevin if the situation were reversed. If he needed a house, he had one, and we had to admit that. Probably not. We always demanded more of you," my mother said, tears in her eyes, "and we always gave Kevin more. We didn't realize how unfair that was until you needed a lawyer to protect yourself from us." I felt my own eyes well up. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot to me. We're trying to do better," my dad said, sounding oddly vulnerable. "With you and Kevin, he needed us to be better parents too, just in a different way. He needed us to demand more of him, not make it easy." That night marked a turning point in our family dynamic. It wasn't a perfect resolution. Years of dysfunctional patterns don't disappear with a single conversation, but it was a sincere acknowledgement and a commitment to change. In the months and years that followed, I saw tangible changes. My parents began celebrating my work achievements with the same enthusiasm they showed for Kevin's. When I was promoted to a supervisory position at the FBI, they hosted a special dinner and toasted my success. At the same time, they began treating Kevin like a capable adult, not a child who needed constant rescuing. Kevin and Melissa eventually bought their own home, a modest 3-bedroom residence not far from mine. They did everything right. They saved for the down payment, secured a good mortgage, and bought within their means. On moving day, I helped them move furniture and boxes, and I felt immensely proud of my brother. You know, he said to me as we unloaded the truck, I never thought buying a house would be so satisfying. I understand now why you fought so hard for your. Melissa gave birth to a baby boy a few months later, and I was asked to be his godmother. When I held my newborn nephew, Jack Robert Sullivan, in my arms for the first, I felt like we had finally become the family we were always meant to be. Imperfect, sometimes complicated, but built on mutual respect and genuine love. As for Michael, the lawyer whose laughter had interrupted my parents' absurd plan, we ended up becoming good friends. His willingness to defend my rights, even in a delicate family situation, made a deep impression on me. We began having lunch regularly, discussing interesting cases as much as I could share about my FBI work, and eventually, well, let's just say our relationship evolved into something more than professional. In an ironic twist of fate, when Michael finally proposed 2 years later, my father joked during the engagement dinner, "Well, at least now you can legally share a house." Everyone laughed, including me. What had once been a source of pain and conflict could now be the object of humor. The wound had healed, transforming into one of those familiar stories that with time and distance even seem funny. Looking back now, 5 years after the house incident, as we call it in our family, I see how that moment of crisis ended up being transformative for all of us. Kevin found his independence and responsibility. My parents were forced to examine their own prejudices and behavioral patterns, and I learned to set firm boundaries, even with people I love. My FBI career continued to flourish. Specializing in financial crimes, I was promoted once again and now lead a small team. The work is challenging and rewarding, exactly as I always wanted it to be. Michael and I were married in an intimate ceremony in my backyard. Yes, the same house that nearly caused a family rift. We decided to keep it, at least for now, both for its sentimental value and the symbolism it has acquired. Sophie, now 11, often spends weekends with us when Kevin and Melissa want some alone time with little Jack, who is 3. She's a bright and determined child, reminding me so much of what I was like at her age. The other day, she said to me in all seriousness, "Aunt Claire, when I grow up, I want to be an FBI agent like you." "Really?" I replied, suppressing a smile. "It's hard work, you know." "I know," she said confidently, "but you always say that the hardest things are usually the most worthwhile." My parents, now in their 60s, are planning to retire. They recently surprised me by mentioning that they're considering selling their house and buying something smaller. "We don't need that much space right now," my mom explained, "and we'd like to have a college fund for Sophie and Jack." "That sounds like a great idea," I replied, genuinely impressed by his change of priorities. "We thought we'd ask for your help analyzing the finances," my father added. "You've always been the most sensible with money in the family." I accepted. Of course, happy to be able to help, and even happier that they recognized my ability. It's strange how life turns around. In a way, the incident at the house was the catalyst that forced us to confront decades of unhealthy family dynamics. It was painful, even traumatic at times, but the end result was a stronger, more balanced family. Michael sometimes jokes that he should have charged higher fees considering how his work ended up being unofficial family therapy. One letter and a few consultations completely transformed the Sullivan family dynamic, he says with a smile. I should add that to my resume. I often think about Michael's laugh that day in the cafe when I first told my story. It wasn't a laugh of derision or mockery, but of pure disbelief at the absurdity of the situation. That laugh was the first moment I could see the situation from the outside, realizing how ridiculous my parents' demands were. It was the moment I stopped doubting myself and began to firmly stand up for my rights. As an FBI agent, I was trained to remain calm in crisis situations, to coolly analyze the facts and make decisions based on evidence, not emotions. Ironically, that's exactly what I lacked when faced with a crisis in my own family. I needed the outside perspective of a lawyer and his spontaneous laugh to regain my objectivity. Now, when we train new agents at Quantico, I always emphasize that our professional skills must also be applied to our personal lives, that the same courage that allows us to confront criminals should give us the strength to establish healthy boundaries with those we love, that the same objective analysis we apply to evidence should help us recognize manipulation and toxic behavior, even when it comes from those close to us. Kevin and I have dinner together at least once a month, just the two of us, a tradition we started after the conflict was resolved. During one of these dinners, he confessed something surprising. "You know, Claire," he said, swirling the wine thoughtfully in his glass, "part of me always knew our parents' request was wrong. But there was another part, a part of me that felt I deserved your home. Not because I needed it more, or because I had a family, but simply because I'd always been given things I didn't deserve. It was the pattern I was used to." "As if it were your right," I commented, non-judgmentally. "Exactly," he nodded. "It took Melissa and that lawyer laughing in your face to realize how distorted my view was. And to be honest, it took seeing you fight for your home, something you earned, to realize that I, too, could earn things on my own, not just be given them. I'm proud of you, Kevin," she said sincerely, "of the person you've become." "I'm proud of both of us," he replied with a smile. "We survived the Sullivan Seniors and even became decent adults in the process." We toasted to that, laughing together the way only siblings who shared a difficult childhood can. Michael and I are considering having children. The idea scares me a little, raising a person, shaping their character, avoiding repeating my own parents' mistakes. But it also excites me to think about building a family based on mutual respect, honest communication, and unconditional, yet not blind, love. Recently, I stumbled upon the document my father had left on my desk that day, the supposed property transfer agreement. I kept it as a memento, not out of resentment, but as a marker of how much we've grown as a family. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't giving in to unfair demands, but establishing healthy boundaries. That true love doesn't require unilateral sacrifice, but mutual respect. As for my house, my precious, hard-won first home, it's still Michael's and mine now. We've done some renovations, updated the kitchen, and turned one of the bedrooms into a shared office. The walls my brother once wanted to measure for his television now display our wedding photos and travel souvenirs. The backyard where my parents imagined Sophie playing now has a small garden where I grow herbs and vegetables. It's our home, one with hard work, protected with determination, and now shared by choice, not coercion. And for me, that makes all the difference. The whole experience taught me a valuable lesson about setting boundaries, something that, as a woman and a professional in a male-dominated field, I continue to apply in various areas of my life. I learned that we don't need to apologize for standing up for what's rightfully ours, whether it's physical property, professional respect, or personal dignity. My work at the FBI taught me to face external threats, but it was that family conflict that taught me to protect my life from the most subtle invasions, those disguised as good intentions and blood ties. In the end, both my home and my family were preserved, not despite my steadfastness, but because of it. And what about my lawyer's laugh that interrupted my parents' plans? It became a symbol for me, a reminder that sometimes the best response to absurdity is to simply recognize it for what it is, and then laugh. Not with cruelty or derision, but with the liberating clarity that comes when we finally see a toxic situation through an outsider's eyes. That laugh was the sound of my liberation. The moment I stopped questioning myself and started standing up for myself. And for that, I will be forever grateful. Time passes in curious ways when wounds begin to heal. It's been almost 7 years since what we call the house incident, and a lot has changed in our lives. Michael and I decided to have children, and now we have a 2-year-old daughter, Emma, who is the joy of our lives. What amazes me daily is how motherhood has made me reflect even more deeply on my own childhood and the family dynamics I experienced. As I hold Emma in my arms, I silently promise to never make her feel the way I have so often, as if her worth is contingent on her performance, as if she constantly needs to prove herself. Emma will be loved unconditionally, simply for existing, not for her achievements or for meeting my expectations. Kevin and Melissa now have 3 children, Sophie, Jack, and little Lily, who was born last year. They were finally able to buy a bigger house after Kevin was promoted to project manager at his tech company. What fills me with pride is seeing how he's matured into a caring father and a devoted husband. He and Melissa have formed a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and supports, something I rarely saw in my parents' marriage. Speaking of my parents, they did retire and sold their old house, moving to a smaller condominium about 30 minutes from my house. Initially, I was apprehensive about them living so close, worried that old dynamics would resurface. But something interesting happened. When Emma was born, my parents seemed determined to be grandparents different from the kind of parents they had been. "Claire," my mother said to me one day as she held Emma, "I promise not to make the same mistakes with her that I made with you." It was a touching moment, especially since she rarely spoke so directly about our turbulent past. I see my parents striving to treat all their grandchildren with the same care and attention. No clear favorites, no unequal expectations. It's a small change, perhaps, but a significant one. My father, in particular, surprised me with his transformation. He, who had always been strict and controlling, now seems softer, more reflective. I once found him looking through old photo albums from my childhood. "I missed so much," he said, his voice breaking. "I was so focused on molding you and Kevin into the children I thought you that I missed out on who you really were." These words, coming from the man who once tried to make me give up my home to please his favorite son, showed me that people really can change even after decades of ingrained behavior. At work, I continue to advance within the FBI. 2 years ago, I was assigned to lead a special task force focused on real estate fraud, an irony not lost on Michael. My team recently dismantled a complex scheme involving fraudulent appraisals and predatory mortgages, primarily targeting seniors and immigrants. The case received national attention, and I was invited to speak at a congressional hearing on predatory practices in the real estate industry. "It's almost poetic," Michael commented after my testimony. "You, who had to fight for your own home, now protect other people's right to theirs." Michael continues his legal practice, but now focuses more on real estate law and consumer protection. We joke that the house incident ended up shaping our careers in ways we never could have anticipated. He frequently refers cases to my team when he suspects criminal activity. In real estate transactions, our home, the same house that nearly tore my family apart, became the center of new and better family moments. Every summer, we host a big backyard barbecue, bringing the whole family together. Seeing Kevin and his children playing in the same space he once wanted to claim as his rightful home is a lesson in how time and personal growth can transform even the most bitter situations. At one of these gatherings, about a year ago, Kevin pulled me to a quiet corner of the porch. He looked nervous, fidgeting with the beer bottle in his hands. "I need to tell you something, Claire," he began. "I've received a job offer in Seattle. A great opportunity for Melissa and me. She could also get a transfer to a hospital there." I felt a tightness in my chest. The thought of my brother moving across the country, now that we'd finally built a healthy relationship, was painful. "It's a great opportunity, Kevin," I replied, trying to hide my sadness. "Will you accept?" "We're still discussing it," he said. "It's complicated with the kids' school and, well, leaving you and the parents." We were silent for a moment, watching our families interact in the backyard, Michael playing with Jack, my parents chatting animatedly with Melissa, Sophie helping Emma walk. "You know what's funny?" Kevin continued. "A few years ago, I would have simply accepted and then expected everyone to adapt to my decisions. Or worse, I would have refused for fear of disappointing the parents. Now, I'm really thinking about what's best for my family, for Melissa, for the kids, RD. For all of us. It's called growing up," I replied with a smile. "I learned from the best," he said, toasting. "You know, that crazy woman who hired a lawyer against her own parents." We laughed together. The kind of laughter that is only possible when pain has become an almost mythical family history. Kevin and his family eventually accepted Seattle's offer. The goodbye was emotional, but not bitter. We promised frequent visits, weekly video calls, and so far, we've managed to maintain our newfound closeness, despite the physical distance. Began planning an expansion, a larger office for me and a dedicated play space for Emma, you know, Michael commented as we reviewed the plans. "Some might say your refusal to give up this house was stubborn or selfish." But looking at everything that's happened since then, it was probably one of the most important moments in your family's history. He was right, of course. That moment of crisis forced us all to confront uncomfortable truths about favoritism, unfair expectations, personal boundaries. It was as if the house itself was merely the catalyst for an emotional storm that had been brewing for decades. My work at the FBI taught me that the most dangerous threats aren't always the most obvious. Sometimes it's the small compromise, the blurred boundary, the seemingly reasonable demands that, accumulated over time, caused the greatest damage. I've learned to recognize these patterns in the criminals I pursued, thanks to the house incident. I've also learned to recognize them in personal relationships. This learning has profoundly influenced how I approach my role as a mother. Emma is just beginning to develop her own personality, with distinct likes and dislikes, some of which differ significantly from my own. Rather than trying to mold her into my image, I strive to celebrate her individuality. I want her to grow up knowing that her worth doesn't depend on meeting my expectations, but on being true to herself. A few weeks ago, I received an unexpected phone call from a former FBI Academy classmate. He now runs a training program at Quantico and invited me to give a talk to new recruits about ethics and integrity in investigative work. I heard about your real estate fraud case, he explained. I was impressed by how you balanced rigorous law enforcement with compassion for victims. I accepted the invitation. Of course, as I prepared my presentation, I realized I wanted to talk not only about professional ethics, but also about how setting the stage for our evolving family story. Our personal values inevitably influence our work. I decided, with some modifications to protect my family's privacy, to include the story of the house incident as an example of how establishing clear boundaries is essential in both our personal and professional lives. On the day of the talk, I was surprised to see a familiar face in the audience. Michael had taken the day off to support me. As I shared my story with the cadets, I watched their expressions. Some looked shocked, others nodded, in recognition, likely recognizing parallels to their own family experience. The FBI will teach you interrogation techniques, investigative procedures, and operational protocols, I concluded. But the most valuable lesson I learned didn't come from a manual or an instructor. It came from understanding that our integrity, our willingness to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it comes at a personal cost, is the foundation upon which everything else is built. After the talk, several cadets came up to me, sharing their own experiences with blurred family boundaries and unfair expectations. One young woman in particular thanked me with tears in her eyes. My family is constantly trying to get me to leave the FBI, she confided. They say it's not a woman's job, that I'm wasting my potential, that I should go home and find a husband. I've been considering quitting, just to calm the waters. But after hearing your story, I know I need to stay strong. That conversation affected me deeply. I realized that my personal story wasn't just about a house or dysfunctional family dynamics. It was about each person's fundamental right to define their own path, to establish healthy boundaries, and to demand respect for their choices. Back in Washington, Michael and I talked about the experience over dinner. You know what's amazing? He mused. If your parents had been reasonable from the start, if they'd never tried to take your house, you probably never. I would have had that conversation with that cadet. She might have given up. Sometimes our hardest struggles end up helping others in ways we never imagined. It was a comforting prospect, the idea that our personal challenges can somehow become beacons for others navigating similar waters. The following month, I received an unexpected email from my dad. He's never been one to express himself well in writing or verbally, to be honest, so I was intrigued by what he could possibly mean that it couldn't wait until our next Sunday lunch. The email contained a link to a local newspaper article. It was about an affordable housing program my parents had helped start in their retirement community fund to help young families make down payments on their first homes. I know it seems small compared to what we almost did to you, my father wrote, but we wanted to find a way to actually help families who need homes, instead of trying to take them from people who have earned theirs. You're old. Lawyer, now our son-in-law is helping us with the legal stuff. I thought you might like to know. I read the email several times, feeling a mix of emotions, pride, surprise, a twinge of sadness for the past, but mostly hope for the future. My parents, now in their 70s, were still evolving, still trying to do better. I showed the email to Michael when he got home. Who knew? He commented with a smile. Your parents becoming advocates for affordable housing. Life really takes interesting turns. And all because you laughed that day at the cafe, I teased. Ah yes, my historic laugh, he joked, pulling me into a hug. I should put that on my resume. Transformed a dysfunctional family with a single, well-aimed laugh. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, I thought about all the ways the house incident had shaped not only my life, but the lives of everyone around me. Kevin found his independence and built a family based on mutual respect. My parents, for all their flaws, found a way to redirect their desire to help the family into something genuinely beneficial. Michael and I built a partnership based on equality and support, and Emma will grow up in an environment where her value is not tied to her usefulness or obedience, but simply to being who she is. The house that nearly tore our family apart ended up being the foundation upon which we rebuilt healthier relationships. The walls my parents once wanted to claim for Kevin now echo with Emma's laughter, with heartfelt conversations, with shared stories of growth and transformation. Next month, Kevin and his family will be visiting us for the first time since moving to Seattle. We're planning a big backyard barbecue, the same backyard my mom once envisioned as Sophie's perfect playground. Now it will truly be a space for all the children to play, but not because anyone was forced to give in, but because we chose to share our lives and our spaces out of genuine love. It's funny how things work out. Sometimes, that laugh from Michael at the cafe, a moment of crystal clarity amidst the confusion, ended up being the beginning of a healing journey for my entire family. It wasn't easy, it wasn't always comfortable, but it was necessary. As an FBI agent, I learned that the truth, no matter how painful, is always the path to justice. And as a daughter, sister, wife, and now mother, I've learned that the same rule applies to relationships. The truth may hurt temporarily, but lies and manipulation cause lasting damage. My home remains mine ours now that I share it with Michael and Emma, but its meaning has changed over the years. It's no longer just a symbol of my independence or a fortress against unfair demand. It's a testament to the possibility of transformation, of healing, of rebuilding broken relationships. And what about the lawyer whose laughter disrupted my parents' plans? He became not only my husband and the father of my daughter, but also a constant reminder that sometimes the best response to absurdity is simply to recognize it for what it is and laugh. Not with cruelty or derision, but with the liberating clarity that comes when we finally see a situation for what it truly is. 7 years ago, I fought for a home. Today, I realize I was fighting for so much more, for respect, for autonomy, for the right to define my own path. And in that fight, I found not only my voice, but also a stronger, more authentic family than I ever imagined possible. The incident from Casa could easily have been the end of our family. Instead, it became a new beginning, painful, challenging, but ultimately transformative. And for that, strange as it may seem, I am grateful. The foundations of my home remain solid, as do those of my family, rebuilt on stronger foundations of mutual respect and understanding. And this, more than any physical structure, is a true home.